Smoke clung to the wreckage like a stubborn ex who refused to move on. I crawled out of the bent metal frame of what used to be my dropship, coughing, swearing, and already missing coffee. My back ached, my ankle throbbed, and the only thing louder than my own groaning was the sound of something alive breathing nearby. Not the friendly kind of alive either, the kind that made the hairs on your neck stand up and your brain start making bargains with any deity within earshot. I staggered toward the sound, thinking maybe I'd find another survivor, someone human. Instead, sprawled half-conscious against the smoking hull, was her. A Beastwoman warrior. Claws like knives, fur matted with blood, armor shredded, eyes barely open but glowing with something primal. And of course, the first words out of my mouth were not heroic. I said, "Oh great, just what I needed. A death wish with muscles." She blinked at me, then rumbled in a voice that vibrated in my ribs. "You found me. You claim me." I froze. "Whoa, hold on. I'm just checking if you're alive. I don't claim anything." She tilted her head, and even half-dead she looked like she could snap me in half. "You carried me from the wreckage. You accept the bond." I glanced down at my hands. Sure, I dragged her maybe 3 inches while trying not to trip over debris, but apparently that was all it took for her culture. I opened my mouth to argue, but she had already grabbed my wrist in a grip that could crush steel and murmured, "I stay with you. You stay with me." Dragging her was like dragging a boulder wrapped in muscle, and every step I took was accompanied by her commentary that only made things worse. "You endure well. You keep going despite weakness." I puffed, "That's called being human. We complain while we suffer, it's our way." She misheard it as some kind of vow. "You suffer for me. You are mine." I almost dropped her right there. Somewhere deep down I wanted to believe she didn't mean it like that, but the double meanings never stopped. When she said, "I like when you struggle," she was talking about me hauling her across the wreckage. To me, it sounded like the setup for every adult Hollywood ever. And when she sighed, "You give me what I need," because I handed her a canteen of water, I choked hard enough to almost drown myself. By the time we made it to a half-collapsed shelter, I was drenched in sweat and muttering every curse word I knew. She was still holding on, staring at me with that unreadable warrior gaze, like I was some kind of puzzle she couldn't stop examining. I sat down, catching my breath, and muttered, "This is ridiculous. I barely survived the crash, now I'm babysitting an apex predator." She growled softly, which I thought meant she was offended, but then she leaned closer and said, "Predator protects her prey. You are safe." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they sent another round of confused heat crawling up my neck. The absurdity only piled higher when others showed up. A few of her people, equally battered, saw us together. She immediately snarled at them, pulling me closer like I was treasure. "He stays with me. He carried me. He endures." They bowed. To her, sure, but also to me. One even gave me a look like I'd just pulled off the greatest conquest in the galaxy. I tried to explain, waving my hands, but every excuse I gave made it worse. I was just helping her out of the wreckage turned into I willingly chose the bond. I only gave her water turned into I shared my essence. I wanted to scream. They wanted to celebrate. The Beastwoman herself didn't seem bothered at all. In fact, she looked smug about it. Every time I shifted away, she yanked me back with a strength that ignored my protests. "You stay," she said firmly, like it was the simplest truth in the world. I grumbled, "I don't have much of a choice, do I?" She nodded solemnly, as if I'd declared something romantic. "Yes. You choose me." I slapped my forehead and muttered, "This is how legends get made, by misunderstandings and bad translations." As the night dragged on, my stomach growled. I tore open a ration pack, munching on stale protein bars. She sniffed the air and asked, "What is that?" I held up the bar. "Processed misery. Human food." She tilted her head. "You eat bland pain and call it strength." The others murmured reverently, repeating my words like scripture. I groaned, "No, that wasn't wisdom. That was me complaining." Too late. They were already treating me like some philosopher king. She reached out and touched my arm, claws carefully retracted. You are fragile. Yet you make me laugh. That stopped me cold. Nobody back home ever called me funny in a way that mattered. She said it like it was important, like my sarcasm carried the same weight as her claws. I coughed awkwardly and tried to shrug it off. Yeah, well, humor's kind of the only weapon humans get for free. She studied me for a long time, then said, "It makes me want to keep you." I laughed nervously. Keep me? Like a pet? Her grin was sharp. Like a partner. Somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, I realized she wasn't going to let go. Not physically, not culturally, not in any way. I'd stumbled into a mess where my flaws were strengths, my whining was wisdom, and my bad luck was apparently the start of a bond. And as ridiculous as it was, as much as I wanted to keep protesting, I couldn't ignore the spark in her eyes when she looked at me. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was the concussion, maybe it was the fact that I'd been single way too long, but I didn't pull away. I just muttered, "Well, guess you're stuck with me." She squeezed my wrist, satisfied, and whispered, "No. You are stuck with me." Morning in the wreckage wasn't kind. My body ached like I'd lost a fight with gravity, which wasn't far from the truth. I woke to find her still gripping my wrist like a child clutching their favorite toy, except this toy had claws and muscles that could tear through armor. I tried to slip away, but the second I moved she growled, pulling me back against her. "You stay." My grumbling didn't matter. Her command sounded less like suggestion and more like law. So there I was, pinned by loyalty I never asked for, with her breath warm against my ear. Breakfast was another comedy. I pulled out a ration packet, tore it open, and started chewing on what tasted like cardboard with regret. She watched with curiosity, then demanded, "Give me some." I handed her half, expecting disgust. Instead, she chewed with great seriousness before declaring, "Bland, but full of strength." Her people immediately began whispering. They thought I was feeding her some holy warrior's fuel. I tried to tell them it was just compressed oats and dispi, but they were already treating it like sacred bonding. One even asked if humans always share their essence so early. I choked, nearly inhaling my food. She nodded solemnly on my behalf, sealing my fate. Things only got worse when I stretched, groaning from the stiffness in my back. She frowned and asked what I was doing. "Loosening up so I don't pull anything." Her ears perked. "Humans loosen themselves before battle." The others gasped like I'd revealed a secret scroll. I muttered, "Yeah, otherwise you wake up feeling like death." To them, I had just described a ritual of preparation that proved humanity's foresight. One warrior even imitated me, grunting as he bent in half, and the others followed. Suddenly I had started a stretching cult without even trying. Sparring practice didn't help either. She dragged me onto the training ground, announcing proudly, "My human will show his endurance." The crowd gathered instantly. I tried to protest, but she shoved me into a stance. She swung, I dodged by stumbling, and her claws sliced air just above my head. The crowd roared. They thought I'd invented a cunning evasive technique. She struck again. I tripped over a rock and crashed into her, knocking us both down. The crowd gasped, then cheered, convinced I had discovered a grappling method. She rolled me off and smirked, whispering, "Clever. You surprise even me." I wheezed. I surprised myself too. Every accident became strategy, every failure became brilliance. When I blocked a strike by sheer instinct, they called it the human shield. When I dropped my weapon and scrambled to pick it up, they thought it was a test of agility. When I bent over wheezing for breath, they decided it was a breath control technique. By the end, I wasn't just her sparring partner, I was her genius human innovator. And she wasn't letting anyone forget it. But the double meanings were the real killer. Every word she spoke had two edges, and the aliens heard only the honorable one. She told the crowd, "He lasts long when I test him." They nodded reverently, while I nearly died from embarrassment. She said, "He knows when to give, when to take, when to push. The warriors whispered about balance and discipline. I was trying not to choke on the innuendo. When I muttered under my breath, "I'm just trying to survive this madness," she announced proudly, "He admits his struggle but never quits." The applause nearly knocked me over. At night, the rumors spread through camp like fire. Everywhere I walked, someone asked how I'd won the Beastwoman's loyalty. I tried telling them the truth. I'd dragged her a few feet out of Wreckage, handed her water, and gotten trapped in her cultural glue. They didn't believe me. To them, I was some kind of romantic hero, the fragile human who had tamed the wild warrior through mysterious rituals. One alien even winked and asked if I'd performed the final bonding yet. I spat my drink. She overheard and calmly said, "Not yet. But soon." I nearly died on the spot. It wasn't just the crowd, either. She started following me everywhere, training, eating, even when I needed a moment alone. I told her, "You don't have to watch me all the time." She tilted her head. "You are fragile. You might fall. I keep you." I muttered, "I'm not a pet." Her grin was sharp. "No. More than pet. Partner." The word made my chest tighten, though I laughed it off. "I don't know if the galaxy is ready for that." She looked at me seriously. "I don't care about galaxy. I care about you." I had no idea how to respond. My first instinct was always sarcasm, so I said, "Great. I'll be the weakest warrior with the scariest girlfriend." She didn't even blink. Yes. Like it was fact. And suddenly the sarcasm didn't feel like a joke anymore. The next day, the elders summoned me. They wanted to hear my combat philosophy. I tried to back out, but the Beastwoman dragged me along, declaring, "He will speak. His words matter." I stood before a circle of towering leaders, sweating through my shirt, trying to explain what humans do. Well, mostly we wing it. Half instinct, half panic. They nodded gravely, murmuring about adaptability. "Sometimes we fight just to prove we're too stubborn to quit," I added. They cheered like I'd just revealed a divine truth. When I muttered, "Honestly, I just make it up as I go," they wrote it down like scripture. By the end of the day, I had somehow become a philosopher, a strategist, and a romantic legend. All because I was clumsy, sarcastic, and kept getting misunderstood. And through it all, she never left my side. She sat beside me in every meeting, walked beside me in every corridor, stood beside me every time I tried to sneak away. At first it felt like a cage, but slowly it started to feel like something else. A bond one hadn't asked for, but one I wasn't sure I wanted to break. When she leaned close that night and murmured, "You make me laugh. You make me strong. I don't let you go," I didn't argue. For once, I didn't joke. I just nodded, because maybe she was right. By the time the third day rolled around, I was beginning to suspect that my reputation had grown far larger than anything I could control. It started with the whispers, then the pointing, then the strange gifts left outside the Wreckage tent. Meat wrapped in leaves, carved trinkets, even a spear bigger than my whole body. Every time I tried to return them, the Beastwoman intercepted, declaring, "They honor you. You keep." When I muttered that I didn't need a spear taller than a house, she leaned in with that grin that always seemed to have two meanings and whispered, "Size matters. Now you have proof." My ears burned while the onlookers clapped like I had delivered another proverb. The elders weren't satisfied with words anymore. They demanded action. A trial of endurance, they called it, where warriors tested their stamina in front of the tribe. My first thought was that it sounded like a death sentence. My second thought was worse, because the Beastwoman announced before I could open my mouth, "He accepts. He will last longer than any of you." The cheers shook the ground, and I realized that in trying to keep me close, she had volunteered me for the alien equivalent of an extreme sports nightmare. Preparation didn't exist, at least not for me. The night before the trial, she sat cross-legged across from me, explaining what I'd face. Lifting boulders, running until your legs gave out, sparring with 3 opponents back to back. I swallowed hard and asked if anyone had ever died during the trial. She nodded solemnly. Yes. Many. But not you. You are stubborn. You will live. I groaned into my hands. That's not a strategy, that's an obituary waiting to be written. She tilted her head. Humans live longer when they joke. So joke tomorrow too. Somehow, her faith was more terrifying than the trial itself. The day came, and the entire camp gathered. I walked out half expecting to trip on my own boots, but the crowd roared like I was already champion. The first test was lifting a massive stone. My arms strained, my spine protested, and my vision went blurry, but somehow I got it off the ground long enough to count. The crowd went wild. I collapsed afterward, wheezing, but the Beastwoman dragged me up and shouted, "See? He carries weight like nothing." I muttered, "Yeah, like my student debt." Nobody understood, but they clapped anyway. Next came the run. Endless laps around the camp, every alien sprinting with legs built like springs while I gasped, sweating like a roasted pig. I wanted to quit on the second lap, but every time I slowed, she barked encouragement that sounded suspiciously like innuendo. "Faster, human. Show them your stamina. Don't stop until you're spent." The crowd hollered, hearing only honorable words, while I nearly coughed up a lung. Somehow, fueled by sheer humiliation and stubborn spite, I made it through, collapsing into the dirt as they lifted me on their shoulders like a victor. I had never felt more like a fraud. The last test was combat. 3 warriors against me. I had no plan, no real chance, just a faint hope that my bad luck would look like genius again. The first lunged, and I panicked, ducking at the last second so he tripped over me and landed face first in the dirt. The crowd gasped in awe. The second swung, and I stumbled sideways, colliding with him so we both went down in a heap. To them, it was a daring sacrifice move. The third came at me full speed, and in desperation I raised my arms. He hit me so hard I spun, but when I staggered to my feet instead of staying down, the crowd erupted like I had performed a miracle. By the end, the 3 warriors lay groaning on the ground, and I was declared the human endurance champion. I should have been celebrating, but all I could think about was the aching in every muscle. The Beastwoman leaned down, lifting me with ease and whispering, "You lasted longer than any expected. You made me proud." My brain was too fried to catch all the implications, but the smirk on her lips told me the double meaning was deliberate. The crowd's cheers blurred into background noise as she carried me away like I was her prize. I told her weakly, "You know I nearly died out there, right?" She shook her head. "No. You lived. You endure. That is why you stay with me." That night the camp wouldn't shut up. Everywhere I walked, warriors bowed or slapped my back. Some asked for lessons in my unique techniques. One even asked if I'd teach them how to trip with such precision. I laughed until my stomach hurt, because the alternative was explaining that my entire strategy was falling on my face and praying. The Beastwoman, however, didn't laugh. She simply told them, "He will teach. His ways are strange but strong." And just like that, I was scheduled to become an instructor in clumsiness. But beneath the chaos, something had shifted between us. The trial had proven to her that I wasn't just fragile cargo she had to protect. To her, I was partner material, not just in the camp, but in her life. The way she looked at me had changed. Less like a body she had dragged from wreckage, more like someone she had chosen. And every time she leaned close, every time her words carried 2 meanings, I found it harder to laugh it off. When I finally asked her why she refused to let me leave her side, she didn't hesitate. "Because you make me laugh. Because you confuse me. Because you fight even when you cannot win. That is strength my people forget. I don't let that go." I tried to joke about being the galaxy's worst role model, but she silenced me with a look that was both fierce and tender. For once, I had no punchline. Just a pounding heart and the terrifying thought that maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to leave either. The days after the trial should have been quiet, but instead they became louder, messier, and far more embarrassing. Suddenly I wasn't just the human who survived the wreckage, not just the clumsy sparring partner, but the so-called endurance hero destined to stand beside their Beastwoman champion. That's what they called her now, champion. And me? Somehow I had been promoted to her consort, advisor, and permanent sidekick, whether I liked it or not. The camp didn't just whisper anymore, they started planning. Meals, rituals, pair exercises, even future offspring conversations I had no business overhearing. Every time I tried to deny it, someone would clap my shoulder and say, "Ah, modesty. The human way." She didn't help either. She leaned into the role with a smirk, always finding a way to make innocent words feel scandalous. When someone asked why I was always at her side, she replied, "Because he keeps me satisfied." The crowd heard loyalty. I heard innuendo. When I tried to explain that I was just surviving on dumb luck, she cut in with, "He is stronger in ways you cannot see. He lasts, he adapts, he gives when needed." By then my face was red enough to be mistaken for a distress beacon. It all came to a head when the elders decided we needed a bonding ceremony. Apparently, their people sealed important partnerships through ritual, and since she refused to let me out of arm's reach, the tribe decided we were already halfway married. I begged her to talk them down, but she only tilted her head and asked, "Do humans not bond?" I told her we did, but usually after more than 3 days of knowing each other and definitely not in front of an entire audience chanting for it. She just grinned and said, "You adapt. You endure. You bond." The ceremony was a nightmare and a comedy rolled into one. They gave me ceremonial garb, basically a loincloth and a sash that felt more like a practical joke than a costume. The Beastwoman looked regal, fierce, every inch the warrior, while I looked like a lost tourist at an alien festival. They had us stand in the center of the circle while a priest began chanting. I tried not to fidget, but she caught my hand and held it firm, her claws resting lightly on my skin. I whispered, "This feels like a trap." She whispered back, "Yes. But you are already caught." The rituals were strange enough, but the interpretations made them unbearable. When we drank from the same bowl, it was called sharing strength. When she pressed her forehead against mine, it was joining minds. When she wrapped her arm around my waist and pulled me against her, it was sealing unity. All I could think was how every act could be read in 2 ways, and she was enjoying the game far too much. When the priest declared, "He has proven his endurance, she has claimed his loyalty," the crowd erupted. She leaned close and murmured, "Now you are mine." I muttered, "I don't remember signing up for this subscription." She smirked. "No canceling." After the ritual, there was feasting. Meat roasted over fires, warriors singing, dancers stamping out rhythms that shook the ground. Everywhere I turned, someone toasted us. I tried to slip away, but the Beastwoman kept pulling me back. "Stay," she said each time, like the word was a command spell I couldn't resist. Eventually I gave up and leaned into it, eating, laughing awkwardly, telling stories about my homeworld. Every little anecdote, about coffee, about running late for work, about terrible human weather, was treated like sacred lore. One warrior asked if humans really lived on a world where water fell from the sky. I said yes, and they gasped like I'd confessed to sorcery. Another asked why I laughed so often, and I told them sometimes humor is the only thing between us and despair. That quieted them, but it also made their respect burn brighter. When the night wore down and the fires turned to embers, I finally asked her the question that had been gnawing at me since the wreckage. "Why me?" She looked at me like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Because you make me laugh. Because you don't quit. Because you fall, and still stand again. My people forget these things. You remind me." I swallowed, trying to turn it into a joke, but for once the words wouldn't come. Instead, I admitted, "You terrify me." She grinned, teeth flashing. "Good. Fear makes you sharp. But I also make you stronger." And maybe she was right. Somehow in just a few days, I had survived wreckage, trials, rituals, and endless misunderstandings. I had gone from a stranded pilot to the supposed genius of a tribe that thought clumsiness was strategy. More importantly, I had gone from seeing her as just a dangerous warrior to something else entirely, someone who challenged me, infuriated me, made me laugh, and refused to let me disappear. She hadn't let me go since the moment I pulled her out of the wreckage, and I wasn't sure anymore that I wanted her to. As the camp finally grew quiet and we sat side by side watching the last flames flicker, she rested her head against my shoulder, heavy and warm. For once she didn't smirk, didn't play with double meanings, didn't tease. She just breathed softly and said, "Now you are mine. And I am yours." I wanted to argue, to deflect, to joke, but the words caught in my throat. All I managed was a whisper. "Yeah, guess so." And maybe, against all logic, against every warning in my head, I realized I meant it.